Okay, I titled today's message "The Iron Gate," and if you read the scripture that we're going to read today, and you probably read it before or you heard messages about it before, then the Iron Gate is the thing that has the least attention, usually. But I was led to focus on that a little bit, as well as on other things. Iron Gate is an interesting thing because usually, especially in ancient times, gates were made of wood. And iron in the Bible has the characteristic of being strong, being unbreakable, unpenetratable. And so an iron gate is a strong gate, one you cannot get through unless it's opened, of course. And it stands for this obstacle that we can't remove, the sin that we keep struggling with and we can't overcome, or maybe that part of our character that we cannot overcome, that we keep struggling with for so long. It can be many things, but and it's different for everyone what his or her iron gate is. And we will see here, as we've seen in the past chapters, that God is working with Peter, and Peter also has an iron gate. And as this story progresses, we will see how God actually deals with this iron gate, and it's very encouraging for us. So the last time we looked at the church in Antioch and how it was actually prospering. It was going well. Many souls were added, particular Gentiles, non-Jews, those who were not of the circumcision. Barnabas had come from Jerusalem. He had brought in Saul from Tarsus, and they worked for a year very hard in that church, and then there came a famine and they brought relief to Jerusalem. And so things for the church were going well. And as I ended last time, Satan doesn't like that. And so he now comes to interfere. And that's what we read in chapter 12 in verse 1. There it says, "Now about that time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church." So everything was going well for the church, and about that time the church was being vexed. That was the time that Satan thought it right to intervene and to make things difficult. First of all, it speaks about King Herod, and it's always confusing, at least to me, who is King Herod. And actually there are different King Herods when we read the Gospels and the book of Acts. This King Herod was King Herod Agrippa the First, and he was the grandson of Herod the Great. And Herod the Great was the one who ruled when Jesus was born. So you remember the story when Jesus was born, that the wise men went to visit King Herod. That was Herod the Great. And so that was the grandfather of this Herod. We are about 50 years later now, so it makes sense. So King Herod the Great was the one who had all the boys under 2 years killed when Jesus was born. And then there is another Herod, Herod Antipas. And that was the Herod that ruled when Jesus was put on trial. You remember that the governor Pilate sent Jesus to King Herod. That was Herod Antipas, and that was the uncle of this King Herod Agrippa. So there were 3 different Herods, and it's a bit confusing all this, but they were not the same person. The one at Jesus' birth, Herod the Great, the one at Jesus' trial, Herod Antipas, and the one here is Herod Agrippa. They were all family, but they were not the same. So that's just some background. He vexed the church at that specific time. He made things difficult for the church while things were going well. And the reason why he did it is also given or becomes clear when we continue, it was for political reasons. He wanted more popularity, and he saw that the non-Christian Jews were annoyed by this whole Christian movement and by these many Jews and Gentiles now that were all following Jesus, becoming Christians. And so that was a bigger part of Herod's following. And so he thought, if I do something bad to the church, then it pleases all these people and I become more popular. It was pure politically motivated. The majority of the citizens did not like Christians. By the way, not much different than today. It's actually of all times that we see that political figures are ready to persecute Christians if it makes them more popular, if it strengthens their position. And it's pride and it's lust for power, and that Satan uses that to fight against God's people. Dictators and despots also turn easily against Christians because Christians have a higher authority above them, and they can't stand that. They want to be the highest authority. That is also something of all times, and so Christians are easy victims or targets. But they are always inspired by Satan to do so. Also here. But when you harass the church, then you take up a fight against God, and that does not end well. It will not end well for Herod either. We will see that next time, not now. But this spoiler alert I can give ahead of time, it will not end well for him. But what did he do? Verse 2. And he, Herod, killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. It comes very direct. It's just these two verses, two short sentences, and we see how ruthless he was. This was something new. Herod went further than all the others had done before him. We have read, of course, in the first chapters how the Jews were after Peter in particular, and later after others. They brought them before the court. They did hearings, and they tried to find legal grounds to punish them, in which they failed. But Herod was a whole different thing. He did not have religious motivation. He did not have to abide by the law of Moses, as the Jews had to, of the Sanhedrin. He just could basically do what he wanted, although also he was limited by the Roman government. But in any case, he simply killed James without trial, without anything. And James, with that, became the first of the 12 who had been with Jesus who was martyred. So we have, of course, Stephen who was martyred, but Stephen was not of the 12 that were with Jesus. James is the first of this group that was martyred. And it shows that these 12 disciples, apostles now, that they did not have divine protection just because they were Jesus' disciples. They did not. And James was one in particular who belonged to the most inner circle of those around Jesus. And I'm sure Jesus loved all his disciples just as much. But in spite of that, there were 3 that were the more inner circle of Jesus' disciples. And that was James and James' brother John. It says here also James, the brother of John, so that we know which James it was. So it was James and John, the 2 brethren, the sons of Zebedee, and it was Peter. These 3 were the most inner circle of Jesus. We see that they were the ones that went with Jesus onto the Mount of Transfiguration in Matthew 17, verse 1. It says there, and after 6 days Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain apart. So again, we see it's James and John, they were the brothers. And in Mark 5 we read it also in verse 37, and he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter and James and John, the brother of James. So these three were very close to Jesus. For 3.5 years they had been together with Jesus, and now another over 8 years later they were still together. They had gone through many things. But Jesus had never promised special protection for them just because they were his followers. On the contrary, he promised the opposite. And in particular, these three, or I should say the two of them, the two brethren, James and John, they had more or less asked for this. This is fulfillment of something that Jesus told them specifically. In Mark 10 we read this, in verses 35 through 39. I want to read it because what we have here in the book of Acts is the fulfillment of this. It says there, and James and John, the sons of Zebedee, come unto him, saying, Master, we would that thou shouldest do for us whatsoever we shall desire. So they were very close to Jesus, and they thought, now we can ask him also a special favor. And Jesus said unto them, What would you that I should do for you? And they said unto him, Grant unto us that we may sit one by on thy right hand, and the other on thy left hand, in thy glory. But Jesus said unto them, You know not what you ask. Can you drink of the cup that I drink of, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? And they said unto him, We can. And Jesus said unto them, You shall indeed drink of the cup that I drink of, and with the baptism that I am baptized withal shall you be baptized. So they asked this special favor to sit on either side of Jesus in the kingdom of heaven. And then Jesus asked this question, and they say, yes, we can drink of the same cup. Now Jesus does not promise them that they will sit at his right and his left hand in the kingdom of heaven. But he does promise them that they will drink of the same cup he would drink of. And that is being fulfilled here for James as he's being killed by the sword. John would have several attempts to be martyred on him. But he survived all of them, and his cup, if you will, was to serve Jesus until the end of his life. He is actually the only of the disciples that would die a natural death eventually, but all his life he would be in service to God, and he went through some horrific things. James was killed with a sword, which means usually that he was beheaded. That's what it means. And there is a church historian, Eusebius, who wrote about this event. So it's not in our Bibles other than what we read here, but he wrote about this, and he said that the soldier who was guarding James was so impressed by the testimony of James and his strength, that he decided to become a Christian too, and to be executed along with James, because that was the consequence, but he was willing to do so. So even in his death, James brought another soul into the kingdom of God along with him, and who knows, maybe that was part of the purpose. God knows. Now, you can imagine that this had an immense impact on Peter, because again, this was the inner circle of Jesus. They had been together with Jesus practically night and day for 3.5 years, and now for 8 to 10 years after that, they were still together much of the time, and so they were very close friends. They were brethren, you can say, in many ways, and so this had great impact. That this was different from before, when Peter and John were arrested. They were brought before the Sanhedrin, there was a hearing, and they did of course, also understand that they could end up being executed, but it was not so direct as here. Here there was no trial, it was just like that. And so this could happen to any of them at any time. So we continue to read in verses 3 and 4. And because he, that's Herod, saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. And then were the days of the unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison, and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. It's a puzzle to me why King James all of a sudden calls Passover Easter here, but anyway, it's Passover, of course, after Passover, not Easter. Anyway, so Peter is arrested. Again, we can say, why is Peter arrested? The reason is given because Herod saw that what he had done to James, killing him, that it pleased the Jews. The Jews were pleased that James was beheaded. When people take pleasure in the wrong actions of the government against their fellow citizens, the governments will always take it a step further. This is, I would say, almost a law, and this is the same today. That's why it is so dangerous to be pleased with the fate of your fellow citizens that with whom you do not share the opinion, and when they are being persecuted by the government. If you're pleased with that, know that the government will take it a step further, and eventually you will be the next one. You will be also part of the victims of this government. You're basically in that position digging your own grave. And we've seen this, of course, many times in the past 2 years, when people take pleasure, when they themselves comply with the measures that the government imposes, and they take pleasure when fellow citizens who do not comply get fined or arrested. Well, one day soon you will also be fined and arrested for something that the government will impose. It pleased the Jews. And we have today persecuted and prosecuted Christians. We have pastors in prison. And of course I have to think of Pastor Arthur Pawlowski at this time. He is for about, 45 days, I think, in prison now. He's certainly not the only one, but this is in Canada, a free country, Western country. And others find pleasure in that because he's a troublemaker, and troublemakers should be taken off the stage. Well, he's a pastor, and pastors are supposed to be troublemakers. They have to trouble those that are not adhering to God's moral laws, those that are away from God. They should feel troubled when they are pointed to the ways of God. And so in that sense, pastors or Christians in general, they are troublemakers to the world. They are. But that's actually a good thing. But when they are being locked up because of that, and when others take pleasure in that, then things are going the wrong direction. That's Satan's tactic, divide and conquer. Make one group of the people hate the other, and one group of the people have pleasure when the other group is imprisoned or persecuted, prosecuted, or even killed. Then the government will take it a step further. That's what it literally says here about Herod. He proceeded further, and then the others will be next sometime. So we see also here a big difference between Saul's motivation to persecute the church, which we read before in Acts 8, verse 1. He had a pure religious motivation. He thought he was serving God by persecuting the Christians. But Herod has only a political motivation. He's serving himself by doing this, and no one else. But now it were the days of unleavened bread. This is the feast that lasts 7 days, beginning at Passover. So it's part of the Passover festivities, as we know. And these are the days when there are many pilgrims into Jerusalem from all around. So it's very busy. And Herod was afraid that if he would execute Peter at that moment, that there could be an uprising, a violent or uncontrollable mob of these Passover pilgrims, and that could cause him problems, and could cause him also political problems, because the Romans would maybe remove him because he caused all this stir. So he thought it wise to keep Peter in prison for a while until Passover was over, and then he would do the same with him as he did with James, because it worked. It's an interesting time frame because it almost parallels Jesus' arrest, which was of course just on the brink of Passover. And it's very possible, we don't know, but if I would have to guess, I would say that Peter's escape, because he will escape, was on the day of the Feast of First Fruits, the same day that Jesus escaped from the grave, from the prison of the grave. But that's a wild guess. No, not wild, but it's a good guess, I would say. So anyway, normally a prisoner would be chained to one soldier. But Herod knew that Peter had already mysteriously and miraculously escaped before from prison. So he thought, that's not going to happen to me again. So he was chained to 2 soldiers. And then there were 2 more in front of the door. So it was very secure, and he knew he cannot go anywhere. And so it says in verse 5 of Acts 12, Peter therefore was kept in prison. But prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. Peter was in prison. That's a sad note, because we know he was in prison for one purpose only, and that is to keep him until after Passover, and then he would be killed. There was no hearing, no trial, nothing. This was what it was. So he was in prison. And then the sentence continues, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. So you see how this sentence is like a scale, and on one side you have he's in prison, and on the other side you have they were praying for him. And that changes the whole thing. If he was only in prison, period, then it would really be period. But, it says, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. They were praying for him. That changes everything, as we will see. The door, the gate, you can say, to freedom was closed. But the gate to heaven was wide open. And it was open because Jesus had opened it. He had torn the veil. And that gate to heaven is still open for us today. We can pray, and we can pray in Jesus' name, as He is the one who opened that gateway for us. And we must use that, because that will change everything. It changes everything here. That's why Peter's fate will be different than that of James, at least at this time. Now it says that they were praying without ceasing, continuously. Other translation may say earnestly. The word used is ektenos. I'll write it down. Okay, I think I got it right. This is the word used, ektenos, and for constant or earnest. It's a very interesting word, because it means all this, but it's also used in medicine, this word, for muscle stretching to its outer limits. So you can stretch a muscle only so far. If you do stretch it further, it will snap. So It is until that point, and stretching a muscle to its limits. That is in medicine that's called ektenos. You can think of a rubber band the same way. You can stretch it only so far, and if you go further, it will snap. So it's really praying to the limit, until there cannot be more. And we know that Luke wrote the book of Acts, and he uses this same word, ektenos, when he describes Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus was actually literally sweating blood. He was also praying ektenos, to the limit. It could not be any more intense. It's agonizing prayer, you could say. Earnest prayer like that has power. It has power. Why does it have power? Because it shows that the one who prays cares about the same thing God cares about. And that is the thing. That is what Jesus means when he says, when you pray in my name, anything you ask for will be given. It's not just anything, it's because you care about the same things God cares about. That is what's happening here. That makes this prayer powerful. And it's also important to notice that the church was praying. It doesn't say his friends or some of the apostles or whatever. The church. The whole body. One member was hurt, the whole body was hurting. And it was hurting so much that it was praying to the limit. And you see also here how important it is for Christians to have a fellowship, to have a body behind them that is there to support, to pray, to call on God when one is in trouble. And so now the whole equation changes, and that's what follows in the verses 6 through 11. I'll read the whole part right away. And when Herod would have brought him forth the same night, so this is in the morning, Peter would have been brought before Herod and be killed. That was the thing. So that night, before that same night, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shined in the prison. And he smote Peter on the side, and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself, and bind on thy sandals. And so he did. And he said unto him, Cast thy garment about thee, and follow me. And he went out, and followed him, and wist not that it was true which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision. When they were past the first and the second ward, they came unto the iron gate that leadeth unto the city, which opened to them of its own accord. And they went out, and passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. And Peter was come to himself. When Peter was come to himself, he said, Now I know of a surety that the Lord hath sent his angel, and hath delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. Okay, again, this was the last night. Basically, you can say this was the last night of Peter's life. He knew in the morning, I will also be killed by the sword, just like James. And again, the death of James must have had a great impact on him. They had been very close for so many years. And what do we read? What do we read? That he was chained with two chains to two soldiers. And you would think these soldiers could not have slept because these chains were rattling, because Peter was shaking with fear. But no, Peter was sleeping. He was sleeping. And that's really, if you think this through, this is amazing. The last night of his life, knowing he would be beheaded the next morning, and he was sleeping. And he was having a good sleep at that as well. He did not have anxiety. He slept. He slept so well that the angel of the Lord had to slap him in the face to wake him up. This is literally what it says. Smote him. Smote him on the side. Otherwise he would have kept sleeping. But while he was sleeping, the church was praying without ceasing, to the limit. And that is part of the reason why he could sleep. He had no anxiety. The angel had to wake him up. It says before that there was light in the prison. He did not wake up from the light until he was hit. And it made me think of, actually of two things. One is that in Psalm 127 it says, He giveth his beloved sleep. That is really something beautiful, that God gives peace. We can lay awake at night thinking of all kinds of scenarios that, by the way, usually never happen. We torment ourselves with these things. But when the peace of the Lord is upon us, He gives us sleep. He gives His beloved sleep. And we spoke about this, I think it's the first video of this, of the messages that we did on this channel. And which was Psalm 3. Psalm 3 is about King David. He's then being persecuted by Saul's men. And he is in a cave, and he has to sleep on the floor and use a rock as his pillow. And he says in Psalm 3, so much encouraged by the Lord, he says in verse 5, I laid me down and I slept and awakened, for the Lord sustained me. What this verse means is, I laid down and slept, means in the evening, the beginning of the night, I laid down and slept, and I awaked. This means in the morning. He's saying there, in other words, I slept the whole night through. Although they were out there after his life, and they could actually find him any moment, and that would be it. But the Lord sustained me, he says. And in verse 8 he then says, salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Salvation is Yeshua in Hebrew. Belongeth to the Lord. Thy blessing is upon thy people. So he gives rest if we trust him and entrust everything to him, which Peter clearly had done. He was able to sleep even in this dire situation. But then as soon as he wakes up, as the angel wakes him up, the chains fall off his hands. They just fall off. Just like that. As he is instructed, he gets dressed and he gets out. Now the soldiers next to Peter, we don't read anything about them, were they awake? What happened? Because there was light there. The chains were falling on the floor. There was sound. Either they were kept asleep by God, or in any case they did not perceive anything of all of this. So this was a miracle in itself, of course. And it continues so because Peter walks out. Again, it doesn't say how this happened. Did the door open? Did he walk through the door? Did he walk through the wall? How did this happen? We don't know. He walked out. That's all we know. Out of the prison. And the soldiers outside, the guards, they also perceived nothing. So they passed the first and the second ward. And these guards outside, they were not sleeping. They were holding guard, and they would normally have shifts to make sure there's always wake guards at the door. It's different than the ones that were chained to him. They would also sleep together with him, but the ones outside not. But they perceived nothing. So, the chains, the prison door, the guards, he just walked away from all of that. And now there was, it says, the iron gate that leads unto the city. And as I said in the introduction, the iron gate is this last obstacle, which is the biggest obstacle it seems, because that's the thing we cannot overcome. And if you think of Peter's imprisonment as a metaphor for our life, it's often what we have when we are deep in sin, when we are away from God, we are bound with chains. And there are all kinds of obstacles that prevent us from getting away from that. But God can just take all of that away, just like that. It's really miraculous. He has to wake us up out of that state first. And indeed, he has to slap us in the face to wake us up out of that and to tell us, come, follow me. But if we do, all these things, they just disappear. But the problem is that we often have this iron gate in the back of our minds. Yes, of course I can follow you, but you might be able to deal with this, you might be able to deal with that, but then there is this iron gate. Then there is this one thing, this one sin I cannot give up, this one addiction I cannot give up, this one piece of my character I will always fight with, whatever it may be. We think of the iron gate. And the iron gate prevents us from getting up in the first place. We are slapped in the face, we wake up, and then we think of our iron gate, and then we go back to sleep. And these chains don't disappear because we are thinking of the last obstacle. We will never get there because we did not take the first step to begin with. And so that is why our faith and prayer has to be stretched to the limit. Ektenos. And if it is, and if we walk in that, then there is no gate, no deadbolt that can stand against the power of God's voice, as we often sing this song. Worrying about the iron gate before we ever get there will cause us to never get there. That's the thing. So worrying about the iron gate before we get there will cause us to never get there. Now Peter was different. As I said, he was trusting the Lord. He had been in prison before. God had taken him out before. He was not worrying about all these things. He was sleeping peacefully, and when God woke him up, he just followed. He did not begin to say, yes, Lord, but the guards, but the chains, but the iron gate. He did not do all this. He followed. He followed. And that's what we need to do. When God calls, that's what we need to do. Follow. Don't think of all these things that seem impossible, humanly spoken, to overcome. Humanly spoken, there was no way he would get out of this situation, ever. But we should not think in human ways. What happened to the iron gate? The biggest obstacle that you could possibly imagine. And that is a picture of what will happen to our iron gate. When you have an iron gate before you, whatever it may be, what will happen to it once you begin to follow God, to follow Jesus? Well, this will happen. It says, it opened to them of his own accord. Now that's interesting. I will also write down the word that is used there, because it's a very familiar word. Automati. And it is where we get the word automatic. Automatic. So what does it mean when a door opens automatically? It's the same like in the supermarket, or in a mall maybe, or in an elevator. You just approach the door and it opens. You don't need to touch even the door. It opens by itself, on its own accord. That is what it is, automatically. And that is what God does. That thing that seems to be the biggest obstacle in our life is actually the thing we need to deal with the least once we are following in Jesus' steps, He will remove it. Remember that the Israelites never had to touch the walls of Jericho. They never had to touch them, to do anything, any effort to bring them down. God did it. All they needed to do is walk according to what God told them to do, to obey. And that's it. And God brought down the walls as He opened here the iron gate. It is so surreal to Peter that he thinks he's dreaming. He has some sort of vision or something. He can't even grasp that this is real, what is happening. And this is really what it is. When God takes away the chains of bondage of sin, it's surreal. Because before you could not imagine that you could live without all this. That you would even not crave all these things. And now it's just disappearing. It's just disappearing. And once outside in the street, it says, then the angel departed. So the angel was with him all the time, next to him. He was not alone. But now the angel disappears. And then it says, after he was come to himself, it's like he pinches himself in the arm. Am I really awake? I'm here out on the street. It really happened. He realizes, yes, this is it. I have escaped from the hand of Herod. The question is why? Why? Well, only God knows. One thing we know. Because they were praying for him. Because they were praying. There was a massive spiritual battle going on while all this was happening. In the heavenly realm there was a battle going on because Satan had moved everything to bring this about, to have James killed, to have Peter next, and now just before it happened, all this happened and spoiled Satan's plans. So that's one reason, but why did God allow it to happen this way? God knows. James was martyred and Peter was not. Not at this point. It was not yet Peter's time. And when it is not someone's time, and someone is God's child, then that person is protected. And he will not go until God allows it. He could not be harmed. And so this really gives us some things to think about. Would we always walk in faith under His protection, knowing that it is real, not a dream, and we can know, and we have these records to assure us that this is how God works. He did the same with King David ages before, and He does the same here. If we walk that way with the Lord, if our relationship is like that with the Lord, and if we are also supported by the earnest prayer of the church, of brethren, this ektenos, this prayer to the limit, then no guards, no gates, nothing, not even the iron gate can hold us. Amen.